A real estate developer named Basim Sabri was indicted in 2001 for offering tens of thousands of dollars in bribes to a Minneapolis city councilman named Brian Herron. Herron also sat on the board of a separate community development agency. The city council and the agency each administered millions of dollars in federal funding. Sabri was charged with violating a federal statute that prohibited offering a bribe of $5,000 or more to a local official of any governmental entity if the entity received at least $10,000 in federal funds. Sabri moved to dismiss the indictment, claiming that the anti-bribery statute was unconstitutional. Because the statute didn't require the government to prove, as an element of the crime, a direct connection between Sabri's bribes and federal funds, he argued that it lacked a, quote, jurisdictional hook, unquote. A jurisdictional hook is a clause that articulates how the statute falls within federal lawmaking power. Without a jurisdictional element, Sabri claimed, the statute was fatally flawed. The federal district court agreed with Sabri and dismissed the indictment. The United States appealed, and the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit reversed, holding that the statute was constitutional. Sabri then petitioned the United States Supreme Court for review. Other federal circuit courts had ruled differently on the statute's constitutionality. So the Supreme Court accepted the case to resolve the disagreement and decide whether Congress can make bribery of state and local officials a federal crime without requiring that the prosecution prove a direct connection to federal funding. The court held that the necessary and proper clause empowers Congress to enact laws that are rationally related to Congress's spending power. Justice Souter, writing for the court, wrote that the anti-bribery statute passed this test. Souter explained that bribes don't need to involve the direct misuse of identified federal funding in order to come under federal jurisdiction. It's enough that the federal funds flow to an agency or governmental unit that's involved in bribery. The Constitution's taxing and spending clause gives Congress the power to collect and spend federal monies to provide for the common welfare. Moreover, the necessary and proper clause gives Congress the power to pass laws necessary to carry out its constitutional powers. Since the landmark 1819 case of McCulloch v. Maryland, the Supreme Court has taken a broad view of the necessary and proper clause. So long as Congress's legislative goals are legitimate and within its constitutional power, the courts generally won't overturn Congress's choices regarding how best to achieve those goals. For example, Congress's constitutional power to create post offices also gives Congress the power to punish mail theft. Congress enacted the anti-bribery statute here because earlier federal anti-corruption laws didn't effectively fight local corruption. The taxing and spending clause gives Congress the power to allocate federal funds to local governments to promote the general welfare. And the necessary and proper clause gives Congress the power to punish those who try to corrupt the local governments that receive those federal funds. Congress doesn't need to require prosecutors to identify the specific federal funds that are being stolen or misused because money is fungible and liquid. Corrupted local governments waste money, no matter where that money comes from. If federal funds are part of the money pool, Congress has the power to prohibit bribery of the officials with access to that money. Therefore, Souter wrote, the necessary and proper clause permits Congress to criminalize the corruption of local governmental entities that receive federal funding without requiring prosecutors to prove that the federal funds were directly misused. The Supreme Court affirmed the Eighth Circuit's judgment and sent the case back to the lower courts for prosecution. Justice Kennedy, joined by Justice Scalia, concurred in part. Kennedy agreed with most of the majority's decision and reasoning. However, he declined to join the majority's general disapproval of facial challenges and claims of overbreadth. Justice Thomas concurred in the judgment. Thomas argued that the result followed from established Supreme Court precedent under the Commerce Clause, so he agreed with the case's outcome. But Thomas questioned how broadly the Supreme Court had interpreted the necessary and proper clause since McCulloch v. Maryland. Rather than continuing to expand Congress's authority under the necessary and proper clause, Thomas would have upheld the federal anti-bribery statute under the court's Commerce Clause cases instead. Sabri v. United States illustrates the considerable breadth of the necessary and proper clause, which is a crucial constitutional provision that enables much of the complex functioning of the federal government.